And good afternoon, Mr. Sharperson. We are delighted to have you at our show Under the Hood. We're almost 3 years old. We're getting close to our third-year anniversary. So
Right.
we're really, really, really happy to have you. And I'm going to read just a little brief bio of yours, and you're going to tell us more. Okay? So Kenneth Sharperson is the Chief Diversity Officer at Armstrong Teasdale. He leads the implementation of the firm's diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy with a focus on fostering a culture of belonging and respect. He has over 10 years experience in diversity and inclusion and a law degree from Rutgers University School of Law. So welcome, welcome. And again, what we talk a lot about in this show is patterns that are created in childhood impact us as grown-ups. And many times when I interview leaders and people talk about leadership, we don't really kind of see the underpinnings of how somebody got to where they are.
Right.
And that's the part that I'm the most interested in. And I find that people who tune into us are also interested. And again, young aspiring leaders sometimes think that, oh, he's just lucky.
Yeah.
And
Well, some of it is luck. There's always a little bit of luck to it.
there's always an element of luck, but
There's
there's
always an
also
element of luck.
a whole bunch of other things. So my first question to you is tell us a little bit about your background, your kind of family of origin, kind of some of the patterns, because I said, as we said, patterns behavior runs in patterns, and we create a lot of these in childhood. So tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can start a little bit from the beginning. I was, the child of a military officer and a school librarian. And so, I was born on a military base. And so a lot of my early life, I actually spent in Okinawa, Japan, living on a military base. And so, while I certainly was probably toddler to maybe 4 or 5 years old, I believe, I can remember small things about that experience. For example, I remember, sort of vividly in a car going to preschool, but I couldn't give you like much more detail.
That
I
would be
remember,
amazing, actually, if you could.
right, right. I remember the one thing I do sort of vividly remember is I remember taking a trip to Hong Kong. And the reason I remember this so vividly is because, being, probably between 3 and 5, at the time, my mom was in a jewelry store looking at jewelry, and I got impatient, and so I took whatever piece of jewelry she had in her hands and ran out into the streets of Hong Kong, which obviously is not a very safe thing. But I remember finding me in some sort of alley with other people in the alleyway, right? And so that was kind of a vivid experience that I remember. I kind of even remember, I think, the shock and horror sort of on my parents' face of
I
like
was just
losing
going to
me.
say, how did your parents respond?
Yeah, but that one I kind of, for some reason, that kind of like is like one that's really vivid that I remember in that time frame. But I think, those experiences, when you look at where I am, today, living overseas, was really something that I think gave me sort of the beginning of understanding other cultures. Maybe obviously at that age, not really fully understanding it. Like,
True.
for example, I remember we did have like I guess you don't call him a nanny, but someone who babysat us,
Hmm.
and also, did the house cleaning and all those sort of things, on the base.
Hmm.
I can't remember her name, but I do, know that I obviously had interactions with her. She was Japanese,
Hmm.
and I learned how to count to 10 in Japanese. I don't even know if I can still do it. But I do think that experience somehow is ingrained sort of in my mind, and it kind of has helped me, as I progressed, throughout life, helped me to understand, the importance of understanding other cultures, and you know, that the world is bigger than just, your little suburb or wherever you grow up.
Yes. And so, in terms of your parents and how they parented you, again, from military, and you said your mother was a
Or
teacher, a
librarian.
librarian,
Yeah, it's like school
librarian,
librarian. Yeah.
right? What were some of the sort of the core values that they instituted in you? you think?
That one of the core values was sort of to be truthful and honest,
Hmm.
at all times. I think, from my father's perspective, um, as someone who, grew up with his grandmother, didn't have a lot of money growing up in South Carolina. But I think, for him, if you were just always truthful, honest, and gave your best effort,
Hmm.
good things could happen because, he was able to, go to college, on an ROTC scholarship, and then from there became, career military, ended up being, retiring as a lieutenant
Right.
colonel. And so, but just that small thing of just always being honest, always, telling the truth. I just constantly remember that lesson, being instilled, in the house. And sometimes because I was probably, a little, mischievous. And
I was
so,
just going to ask you. I
right.
just
And,
had a
and I think
little.
that was sort of the context of that, which is, no one's perfect. Maybe there are situations that are happening to you. But if you're truthful, honest, then the good things can happen from that, right? Maybe we can help you. Maybe it's a situation where, maybe the information they're receiving from maybe a teacher or something like that isn't as accurate as it seems. But, but that was, one of the lessons. I mean, one of the things I think too, with my mother, I don't know if it's a value necessary, but she instilled in me a love of reading.
Hmm.
I guess her being a school librarian. And so
Right.
being home all summer, um, it was okay, we go to the library, pick out, like 8 to 10 books. And then you would read those books, and the next time, by the time the books were due, you take those books back and come back and get some more. And I think even to this day, there's still times where I just really appreciate the ability to just sit down in the
Yes.
quiet of just reading and getting immersed in a story.
It's my favorite thing to do,
Yeah, there you go.
especially if I'm sitting on a beach
Right, right. Or a rainy day like today.
or a rainy day. So you were brought up with very, very strong. How about the family? The family values. You have siblings as well?
Yeah, I have an older sibling. So he's I think 4 years older than me. So,
Hmm.
so it was the four of us.
Yep. Yep. And then you said you were a little mischievous. What were some of the patterns that actually might have gotten you into a little trouble that you had to kind of look at and reevaluate as you were moving along in your career and your life?
from I guess, I had a, I, we moved into, um, I guess my childhood home in Annandale, Virginia in 1975.
Hmm.
And so that was from Japan to there. And so I always had a strong group. The neighborhood was a very good neighborhood. I think we talked a little bit about this before. We were the second black family to move into this
Yes.
neighborhood.
Yes.
The first black family in the neighborhood were actually my parents' college friends from South Carolina
Mm.
State University. And so I imagine there was probably a phone call because, you don't email them, but probably a phone
Right.
call saying, hey, there's a house, around the corner from us
Hmm.
because they knew we'd just gotten into town, the Fields family. He actually was I think he retired as a general, I believe, Mr. Fields. But so there's always so besides Mike, who was their child, there were other kids in the neighborhood, and there was sort of a, your typical, the houses faced each other. There was a yard between the houses. At 9 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, after you watch cartoons, everyone just kind of ended up in the cul-de-sac and out playing. But because of that, there's a lot of free time. For us, there was woods nearby, and different things like that. So, we always found something to do, and sometimes probably not the best thing to do. There was always someone with a BB gun and squirrels, involving squirrels and trying to get them, out of the
Yes, I have
down
three
the
boys.
street.
I know.
Right, right. But really, it's just more so, we just really kind of roamed the neighborhood and found different things to do. I remember, walking to school at one point, and we had to walk through actually, back to our public school. We had to walk through St. Michael's, which was the local Catholic school, but they had a creek, sort of, I guess traversing their property. And we would stop. We would catch crate, I think the crawfish. We would catch a little crawfish, I think they're called, and then we would like make them fight each other. And how cruel, right? I mean, And then, my friend, I had one friend, I won't say his name just in case, this gets out there. We had one friend who always, for some reason, had fireworks, like firecrackers, not like the standard ones because they weren't
Right,
legal in Virginia. I don't know, maybe
right,
from family trip.
right.
And he would make one, or the loser would have, he'd like make the claw grab the firecracker and then light it off. And and looking back on that now, I can see how cruel that
Yes,
probably was. But that was just sort of the way that the neighborhood was. You could walk,
right.
anywhere you wanted to. You always felt safe. Um,
So from your background, from the way that you were in terms of being African American, from the way that you're describing, this was not a central piece of the universe in terms of socially and in terms of the neighborhood, or am I incorrect about that?
I would say probably it was a central piece in that I was aware. And I
Mm-hmm.
think I was aware because, my parents, growing, both of my parents from South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And so growing up in the deep South, I think I was made aware from the perspective that they would say things, just be careful,
Mm-hmm.
and like the
Mm-hmm.
one lesson I remember my dad, as I got older, actually, the one lesson that I remember that he always would impart on me when I went out, he said, remember, if something's going on, you need to walk the other way because they're going to notice you. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because I was a
Mm-hmm.
football player and I was, a large, guy in the crowd of people and
Right.
things like that. And so I can't say, sort of like when you say it's a central theme, I think it was definitely a theme. The
Mm-hmm.
reason I say it wasn't central until probably later, like in the high school years, is because, even though again, my parents, I think, were a little bit skeptical of moving to a community like that, and
Mm-hmm.
then, having their child just freely roaming the area. I think they also realized that um, you can't protect me at all times, right? And the kids were nice, the families were nice, like the fan behind us, the Mahonies. The father was an FBI agent. In fact, when I graduated from law school, they actually ended up moving here in Jersey, so I invited them. And I think their son Michael here is actually a police officer here in Chatham. So I never felt like different necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Were there incidents where once or twice, like, was I like the one that was picked on because I was the only, well, besides my brother, the only African
Mm-hmm.
American kid in the neighborhood? There were probably one or two instances like that
Right.
where something happened and it's like, okay, maybe they are targeting me, maybe they're not. But again, we also played games like you'd whisper, to everyone, like run away from, Michael, and then Michael, you'd say run away from Steve, and then everybody would run this way and Michael would run that way, right? So was it targeting? I don't know. Was it just kids having fun? I don't know. And that's, I think, the dilemma um, that even as an adult, you sometimes have when things happen to you as an African American.
Yeah, so the reason I asked too, because in terms of the way that you have moved through, the law, and now you represent the diversity and inclusion in your law firm, what were some of the impacts of how you got there?
So I think, well, I'll tell you what happened really was I was teaching for 5 years out of my undergrad. I was teaching health and physical education and coaching football, basketball, um, even coached soccer, actually. I played all three growing up. And I did that for about 5 years. And then at some point, I thought that there were a lot of issues with public education. Some with just how kids were being treated by the teachers and the administration and things like that. Some was, really, how come kids are acting the way they're acting inside of school. I mean, obviously, a lot of it comes from home, and you don't know what kind of issues people are bringing to the school. But it just seemed to be that there might be a better way
Mm,
for this to work. And so, I thought that that was why I was going to law school, was to hopefully one day be able to reform, the public education. Unfortunately, I have not really fulfilled that goal yet.
yet.
Um, but that does lead me to kind of how I got to sort of where I got. And
Mhm.
so I did go to law school, kind of just one summer, I think it was summer of '97, just said, hey, you know what? I'm going to do this. And so I went to like, that was when you could go to Borders or Barnes and Noble
Hmm.
and just sit in there and like flip through the books and read the books. And that's how I prepped for the LSAT. I think I did eventually buy the LSAT prep book. But I spent a lot of time in Barnes and Noble just using it in the bookstore. And I ended up going to Rutgers. And, I chose Rutgers. I had a few other options, one on the West Coast. I think Vermont Law School is another option. But Rutgers had a what they call the minority student program,
Hmm.
and it's the oldest. I guess for law school, it's probably I mean, it's no longer called an affirmative action program, but at the time it was an affirmative action
Right.
program, and it was one of the oldest ones. It's still one of the oldest ones, I think. Always been one of the oldest ones in law schools, and it came out of the riots in Newark, New Jersey. Because that's where the law school is located in Newark. It's not on the
Right.
Piscataway campus where
Right.
the
Right.
main
Right.
campus is. And so essentially what happened was um, individuals were getting it, being arrested and things like that during and after the Newark riots, but there was no representation
Mm.
that looked like the people who were getting arrested, the African American citizens of Newark. And so the law school decided to do something about that, and that was try to attract more diverse
Interesting.
candidates to the law school. And so that program has, really shifted over the years. I mean, now it's completely different. I think at the time, like most programs then, it was targeted at African American college students.
Hmm.
And then it's kind of expanded to when I was going through in the 90s, basically, Hispanic, Asian, African American. And then, what I guess they deemed that, I think the term was disadvantaged white students. So from a socioeconomic standpoint.
Right.
But that was also around the time that there were other challenges to like affirmative action programs. I think that
Yes.
was the Michigan case. I think it was the Michigan case, the
Hmm.
University of Texas case at the time. And so the program even transitioned again and transitioned to now essentially anybody could apply through the minority student program, but it had an essay component to kind of talk about why you wanted to do the minority student program because it wasn't just it wasn't like they were letting you in school without merit, right?
Right.
You still had to have merit. It's just that the program provided some supports. So, for example, there were
Yes.
like study groups and things like that, and those groups were open to anybody who wanted to. So, if you wanted to see, like, if you went through the program, you were required to go, right? So that meant going to class all day and then spending another 3 hours on campus
Oh.
in your study groups, right? So if you wanted to spend your time doing that, because it wasn't easy, but it was those things were open to everyone. So that was kind of again my first, I guess, um, sort of viewpoint of kind of where diversity, equity, inclusion,
Putting some of these things together,
yeah, it
right?
kind of falls into place. So then, when I started my career, after graduating from law school, I had the good fortune of clerking on the appellate division in New Jersey for the now the retired Justice Johnny
Mm.
Wallace. He was elevated to the Supreme Court of New Jersey the year after I clerked for him. So I always like to tell people it was my work that got him
Yes.
there. I doubt it was, but but when I started out my career, I wanted to just get involved with bar association work and kind of the networking of how that works, and hopefully to build my career. And it was suggested to me from actually the first African American female New Jersey State Bar president, Carol Corbin Walker, that I try to join the diversity committee of the New Jersey State Bar Association, and that's kind of really how
How
this
how it all
got
kind of
started. Right? Yeah. So.
evolved. Let me ask you something else, okay? Because a lot of what I deal with in my work is about conflict.
Mhm.
And so, again, going back just briefly to your family, how did they deal with conflict in the family?
Um, I would say, they were probably not well. And
Hmm.
and the reason I say that is because I know that my father was a Vietnam veteran. And so actually I was born while he was serving I think his second tour of duty. And so the story that my mom always imparted to me was that because my father was very quiet, but he was quiet, but you knew when he meant business, right? Like, so he didn't have to use a lot of words at all times. And so, a lot of times when I would see like conflict, like for example, if my parents were arguing and things like that, it seemed to be that my mother doing a lot of talking in most of the talking, and my father was sort of quiet. And I saw the frustration that had, toward to my mother, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so I would say that the conflict wasn't probably I probably didn't learn good conflict resolution skills from them.
Hmm.
And I probably learned a lot more just in my experiences, outside of the home. Um, and I think that's, again, I think, it's hard to really say because I think, again, my understanding is Vietnam really changed him.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And
Yes.
and and the reason I say that is because um, I recall again, kind of the childhood thing, right? I recall going home to Orangeburg, South Carolina with him, and that's where South Carolina State University is. It's also where he
Hmm.
went to college, but it's also where he was raised. And I remember just walking down the street and someone, yelling, sweet sharp, and I'm going, what's going on with it? And he reacted, and I saw the smile on his face, but that was his nickname because he was such a nice dresser in
Hmm.
college. They called him Sweet Sharp, you know what I mean? But again, that was just one of the instances where I saw like I saw a different person
Yes.
than I was used to
Yes.
seeing as a father. And I guess that for him, that childhood experience, right, of that nickname, because that was before the war, that I saw like the smile and I saw him, in engaging with someone and very communicative, very talkative in that
Hmm.
conversation. But yeah, no, I would say, though, just to kind of bring it back to the conflict thing, I would say, that lesson though probably did not teach me how to handle conflict well in the household. And a lot of those skills I had to learn outside of the
Yes.
household.
So I always say that good mental health is not a natural sport, it's a learned
No?
sport, right? And we have to learn these skills from somewhere, and they are teachable skills,
Yes.
just in the same way as so many other things that we do. So let me ask you another question. Now that we are now in May of 2025, and the world is kind of a bit topsy-turvy at this point. There's a lot of chaos. What are some of the challenges that you see in your work? How conflict shows up at work or in the environment that you're now sort of a leader in?
I mean, I think conflict kind of, I think when you think about like the strategy as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion programming and initiatives, there's often conflict because I think there's a lot of people who don't necessarily understand that there's three separate principles, three separate concepts uh, that kind of all lead into creating a better workplace and a more inclusive workplace for
Hmm.
everybody. And I think that um, when you're trying to create a strategy or you're trying to push something forward, there's always, again, individuals who I think, and I hate to use the word anti-DEI because I think a lot of people aren't necessarily anti-DEI. They're anti what they think
Yes.
diversity and inclusion is, right? And I don't
Yes.
think they have a full understanding, or they're anti what's being put in the media as to what we're trying to do. And I find that's where a lot of the conflict in my work
Hmm.
happens, where
Hmm.
I might want to push an initiative forward. And the way things work, in a law firm is, you have executive committees, you have equity partners, you have a whole structure of how the law firm runs. And then you also have in law firms, it's about reputation, right? If you want to always have a great, yeah, as an attorney and also
Yes.
as a firm, you always want to have a good reputation. So there's a lot of different, you know, things
Yes.
when you want to institute something. A lot of different mindsets coming in. There's the
Yes.
mindset of, are we going too far with this particular initiative, particularly now because there's so much scrutiny.
Right.
But is this too far, right? Like, for
Hmm.
example, if we wanted to, you know, put a program in where we want to specifically focus on recruiting, at a certain type of school, right? You might have like there's the one side that's like, no, 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 we can't do that because that's that might be illegal. And it's the question is, well, no, it's not because we're not saying we're hiring someone just because of a
Hmm.
protected characteristic. We're just saying, hey, we're expanding the pool, the talent pool
Right.
by going somewhere where we might not go. Because the one thing about our profession is it's very much um, a profession where schools matter to some extent because some clients want, someone that has X degree, right?
Yes.
There's
Yes.
nothing wrong with that necessarily, but the thing is, particularly nowadays, I think that's sort of like days of old. I think in this day and age, people make decisions to go both undergrad and graduate school, law
Hmm.
school, et cetera, on a variety of reasons. Scholarship money, right?
Right.
If I can
Right.
go for free, I'll go to state school X, right?
Yes.
And so I do think that nowadays you certainly can find more talent than just going to certain schools. So you have that sort of like perception of, okay, are we going too far, right? On
Hmm.
one side, and then you have the other side of, which is we're not going far enough. We should be doing this program. We should be doing this. And then there's like sort of a voice of reason sort of in the middle. I think we talked about a little bit about sort
Yes.
of 20,
Yes.
60, 20 rule.
Yes.
So you have 20% saying, no, 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 we can't do that. 20% saying, okay, we should be going further. And then people in the middle are kind of like, oh, I could go either way. And that's a lot of like where the conflict I see, which is, you kind of freeze, right? Because it's like,
Hmm.
okay, we think this is going to be a good initiative. We think we should put this as part of our strategy. But then it takes so long sometimes, and not necessarily at Armstrong Teasdale, but just in even other places I've been. Sometimes it takes a little longer to get something implemented than necessary.
Right. 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 So you have quite a job.
Especially nowadays.
Especially nowadays. So this is just a little tip of the iceberg of the things that we actually could talk about because what you're doing is so rich and important and so many diverse, opinions, as you said.
Right.
So if people want to get in touch with you, Kenneth, what's the best way?
Well, you can just by email. It's K Sharperson at atllp.com. Also, if you just Google Kenneth Sharperson, the website will come up. And certainly, if you have questions or just want to, talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and anything related, I'm certainly open to any of those conversations.
Oh, and in the world that I'm in, there's a lot of people that want to talk to you. So,
Well, I hope so. I'm certainly
so
willing to be a resource.
So thank you so much. I
Thank
appreciate your
you.
time. And it took us a little while to kind of figure it out, but we did. And again, I would love to have another conversation because
Likewise.
there's many more
Likewise.
questions that I have in my mind.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
sure.
Thank you so much, Kenneth.
All
And
right,
thank you,
excellent.
everybody,
Thank
for
you.
joining us. Yeah.
All right, take care. All right.
Okay. So don't hang up.